Ethereum, all of those actually relate to dopamine. Dopamine is the fundamental currency that we're all working for. And dopamine has this quality of making us focused on things outside our immediate experience. This is why people who are on cocaine or methamphetamine, which is a really extreme version of dopamine increase, they tend to be all about plans and action. They're not sitting there thinking about how wonderful they feel in their own body. Whereas drugs like cannabis and psilocybin and drugs, these are not drugs that I recommend people use recreationally. I'm not passing judgment, but I just want to be clear about what I'm saying and not saying. That any drugs that increase serotonin tend to make people kind of still, focused on their internal landscape, their thinking. It's kind of an internal reflection thing. So the serotonin system and the dopamine system are kind of antagonistic to one another. And the prolactin system is associated with the serotonin system. So prolactin is kind of about, it's a mellowing out.
Interesting.
And just to nail the point, there are many people in the world who suffer from schizophrenia, 1% of the world's population, a huge number, a very sad thing, psychosis, hearing things, et cetera. And most of the drugs designed to treat schizophrenic psychosis are drugs that reduce dopamine. And oftentimes you'll see people on the street who are taking these drugs and they'll be writhing like this with their face. Sometimes men will have gynecomastia, they'll have breast development because these drugs block dopamine, increase prolactin, and disrupt the motor pathways that are associated with movement.
Wow.
I say this for two reasons. One is it illustrates the relationship between prolactin, dopamine, movement, et cetera. But the other is to hopefully invoke a little bit of empathy for people that oftentimes we will see people who, if they're shouting and acting crazy, that's probably an unmedicated person who's bipolar or has schizophrenia. But if you see someone in their catatonic or they are writhing and acting very strange, that's a person who's, we don't know for sure, but very likely is actively trying to treat their own psychosis to eliminate the voices and things of that sort. So I say that because we have a big homeless population issue in California and elsewhere too. And oftentimes we see people acting crazy and we think, oh, they're, we make this disparaging judgment. Everyone's prone to doing it, of course, but they're crazy. But oftentimes those crazy movements and the things they're doing are the reflection of drugs that block the dopamine system.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't mean to make it dark, but I think that there is 1% of the world's population is a huge number.
That's a lot.
And a lot of people suffering from these things. Yeah.
Now, I want to bring it home with this idea about drugs, specifically smoking, alcohol, and let's say marijuana. I guess the most commonly used drugs by most people. How much do those three substances affect dopamine and motivation and focus?
Okay.
And how do they affect the brain chemically?
Yeah.
If you're using them on a consistent basis, let's say, every week you're using one of these, does it affect the brain that much? Or does it not really affect the brain in terms of focus, motivation, and dopamine?
Okay. With the caveats, excellent question, by the way, and I think actually a fundamentally important question because we live in a world of substances.
Yes.
I mean, we all have to eat, we all have to hydrate. I'm drinking caffeine right now. As I mentioned, drugs and alcohol have never been a thing. I was part of an MDMA clinical trial. I did two of those sessions. That's a drug, right? But it was part of a medically supervised clinical trial. But I'm not a person who uses recreational drugs.
Right.
And so I want to just also set up the caveat that I have no judgment whatsoever. I think if people are informed, they can make better decisions for themselves.
Yeah. Okay. I'm curious more about the scientific data. What is it?
Yeah.
People are going to use it whether they, they know
just
about
know
it or
what
not.
you're doing.
Yeah, just know what you're doing.
Let's take nicotine first.
Yes.
I have a colleague, not at Stanford, who has a Nobel Prize, who chews Nicorette. Why? I asked him why, and he said, well, for years he was a smoker, and it allowed him to focus. And then he realized that lung cancer is something he doesn't want, so he quit, and he couldn't focus as well, so he started chewing Nicorette. Yeah. That's right. Constantly. Nicorette stimulates acetylcholine receptors called nicotine receptors, and they are located in multiple places in the brain and body, but they are highly enriched in the area of the forebrain called nucleus basalis that increases focus. And nicotine increases focus. Okay. It does. It's the smoking part that can mess you up. And nowadays, I see a lot of people vaping. That seems to be a big thing. And that's a big concern with kids. And again, now I'm not a parent. I'm not a parent. But I think
What does vaping do to the brain?
well, they're becoming highly addicted to nicotine stimulation, and it's very, very hard to quit nicotine stimulation because the level of pleasure and focus that you get from nicotine stimulation is significant. You get a dopamine increase and the nicotine increase, and that makes you feel motivated and focused. It's like the perfect storm of chemicals to allow you to do really focused work. And so nicotine, because it increases dopamine and acetylcholine, is this magic elixir for motivation and focus. But it can be potentially addictive and hazardous in some cases. I actually have several friends that dip Nicorette all day long. Some people feel sick doing it, some people love it. I should mention some safer alternatives, perhaps.
Sure.
This isn't really about supplements, but there is something called alpha GPC, which I occasionally take, 300 milligrams of alpha GPC to do a work bout. It does increase focus because it increases acetylcholine release.
Got it.
There is some evidence that alpha GPC at, I think, 600 to 900 milligrams per day can offset some of the mental decline associated with Alzheimer's and aging. But this is an over-the-counter thing. People have to check with their doctor.
Right.
Okay, so that's nicotine. That's how that works. But that's why people smoke. That's why they take Nicorette. That's why people are vaping, and that's why people are taking alpha GPC. And nowadays, the whole business of nootropics is, smart drugs are mainly consist of things that have caffeine to increase adrenaline for alertness and dopamine for motivation, and things that increase acetylcholine and things like alpha-GPC. Okay, then there's alcohol, and alcohol is more of a sedative. Alcohol's main effect is to reduce the amount of activity in the forebrain, which is involved in planning and inhibiting. It's involved in the no-dos. Right? It's also involved in the sense of self, your self-image, who you think you are. So when people have a drink or two, they feel less inhibited. They also, at least at the early stages of drinking, they tend to get more confident. They tend to continue drinking, then they tend to lose their self-image, they forget who they are, they can even go blackout drunk. And the downstream chemicals are interesting. For a small, maybe 8% of the population, alcohol causes a huge dopamine increase. These are the people that from the first drink, they discover that they are an alcoholic. I've known people like this. Then these are the people that nobody else. It's not just a tolerance, it's that dopamine system kicking in. Whereas for most people, it's more of a sedative, it works through some GABA system, and it's more of just kind of a tranquilizer. Okay.
But it doesn't help you focus.
No. So a lot of people self-medicate. So being alert is a prerequisite to being focused, but being too alert makes it hard to focus because then your spotlights are going all over the place. Some people use alcohol as a way to reduce that level of alertness slightly and get into kind of a groove where they can, focus a little better than they would otherwise.
Got it.
Ideally, you would know how to do that without the alcohol, but a lot of people use alcohol for that reason. Right. Okay. I'm going to make some enemies here, but I have family members who will say, I need a drink. People will say, I need a drink. That is a sign of somebody that can't regulate their nervous system, right? Like, I need a cup of coffee and I'm not being disparaging of these statements. I've said I need a cup of coffee. But what you're really saying is that your system requires this chemical to get a lift. It's not a crime for most people, but if you need a drink in order to relax, in my mind, you don't actually have control over your nervous system. Wow. That's, no judgment, but it would be wise to try and develop some behavioral tools that could perhaps work alongside your pharmacology, if that's what you want. If you still want to pursue pharmacology. Yeah. And then there's cannabis, there's marijuana, and there we have to divide nowadays among CBD versus THC, and the potency of a lot of edibles and people smoking cannabis, the potency has gone way, way up. So there's big dopamine increases, big serotonin increases, which is the kind of mellowing effect or the lack of anxiety. And then, of course, there's this huge array of strains where, anytime I tell a really seasoned pot smoker that I don't like cannabis, I just don't. Admittedly, I tried it years ago. I did inhale and I didn't like it. And so I didn't do it again. But I'm told that there are now many different strains, some of which have a certain type of psychoactive effects, make people focused and alert. Others that are making more sleepy. There's a huge array of effects. Dopamine, serotonin, and what's called the cannabinoid system. And this is interesting. The cannabinoid receptors are actually named because they bind cannabis. They're in the hippocampus and other areas of the body. They're involved in pain modulation. Surprisingly, a lot of people will smoke cannabis for pain in a coma because it reduces eye pressure. A disease of pressure. And it's involved in learning, memory, and forgetting.
Ooh.
That's right. So
but it's involved in forgetting.
That's right.
Not remembering.
Correct. So stimulation of the cannabinoid system makes you forget things. And let's just put it this way: pot smokers are not they're not savants when it comes to remembering things. And if they are, it's fair to say that they would be better at remembering things if they didn't use cannabis. But again, I want to be clear what my stance is on this, because I know that many people derive great benefit from some of these things. And provided it's done legally, age appropriate, etc. Again, no judgment. I think that there are people who derive benefit. It's a question of context. And the one context that we know this is very problematic, all of this is problematic, is in the developing world. Because up until about age 25, the amount of neuroplasticity that you can get from any single event, chemical or behavioral or otherwise, is very robust. And so if people are growing up using a lot of a drug, then the brain is reshaping, and those dopamine circuits are reshaping, and the serotonin circuits are reshaping according to that chemical environment. And so I think it's important to know that, and so for some people, for instance, who relied heavily on ADHD drugs, Ritalin and Adderall, during childhood, it's very hard for them to come off as adults.
Yes.
And again, there are drugs like modafinil, armodafinil, Ritalin, Adderall that have helped millions of people. And there are also millions of people who are relying on these compounds who probably don't need them, but they aren't aware of some of the other protocols and approaches. So it's sort of a situation whereby the pharmacology is very potent, it's available, and so people go to the lowest.
You're a wealth of information. HubermanLab.com, the podcast Huberman Lab, if you guys want a weekly dose of neuroscience information on optimizing the body, the brain, sleep, all these different things. We've got one of the top podcasts in the world, YouTube channel, Instagram channel. It's all at Huberman Lab everywhere. I highly recommend you subscribe. I'm trying to get you to do a book soon. I keep saying it. I don't know if there's a book that works, but hopefully.
My editor asked me. I've been working. I finished the book, and then I have not sent the book back to the publisher. Eventually there will be a book or books plural.
Multiple. We need multiple.
As you probably noticed, I'm not very succinct, and so for me it's just been great fun. And by the way, I owe you a great deal of thanks, to join the ranks of the podcasters, because you've been a tremendous inspiration and a source of support in having me on several times and in getting the word out there. Podcasting is one form, books are another, and one of these days I'll get them together.
It's coming. They're coming. But Huberman Lab, in the meantime, is an amazing show, YouTube channel, Instagram. You do some lives that are very informative. You break down all the science, which I love. So people need to go check you out there. We're going to do a part 2. We're going to come back and talk about sleep and all things sleep here. So make sure you guys are coming back for that when we drop that. I want to ask you the 3 truths again in your definition of greatness. See if it's changed.
They're always the hardest questions.
I've got them up here, so I'm curious if it's the same thing.
Oh my. Okay, well if I migrate off those.
If it's different, that's great.
I guess it means there was neuroplasticity.
There you go. Yes. So 3 truths. If this was your last day and we didn't have access to any of your information, what would you say are those 3 truths that you would share with the world? 3 lessons you've learned that you would share with the world.
Believer in what the Oracle said, which is know thyself. It's very important for all of us to repeatedly take stock of where our strengths are, where our weaknesses are, where we find meaning and purpose, and where we find joy, and to take stock of those. And it's a simple exercise. You just take a walk or write it down and be as honest with yourself as one can be, and to try and lean into the strengths and try and make up some of the deficiencies, which we all have. I certainly do. Many deficiencies, as the people in my life will tell you. But I think it's a very important exercise. That's probably the first one. The second one is take care of your physiology. You know, I believe in psychology. We are psychological animals. We are storytellers. But if your physiology isn't where it needs to be, if the foundation is troubled, it's going to be very hard to navigate mental states. And so I've often said, and I'll say it again, that you can't control the mind with the mind if you want to look to the body to control it. So if your thoughts, if you're having a hard time controlling your thoughts, your feelings and emotions, you're feeling triggered, you're feeling like everything's bearing down on you, try to get out of that trap by focusing on particular breathing, take a cold shower, go for a walk, get some sunshine, do something to shift your physiology so that you can approach that challenge from a different stance. And then the third one is one that I'm getting increasingly into these days, which is what I would call get the download. I'm getting a lot of value from this personally, which is, you know, when you wake up in the morning, your brain is in that kind of liminal state between wakefulness and sleep. And if you bombard yourself with sensory information, mainly through screens, you lose out on a key opportunity to hear some of what truly your subconscious processed during the middle of the night. And so I suggest when you go outside, take a little notebook and a piece of, a pen or a pencil, and jot down what comes to mind, if anything. Some days something comes to mind, sometimes no. But again, if you're allowing space for it, you'll be amazed at what kinds of ideas and clarity can come about as it relates to your work and your relationships and yourself. It's really a sacred time, and it's one that I think we've kind of bulldozed out of the way by just bringing in more stuff. And all that stuff is great. I love the internet. I really do. I think it's really cool, and there's so much learning to be had and pleasure to be had. But I think that try and get the download of your life experience, and that happens in that early time. So just create a little bit of space, and you'll benefit.
I like it. You hit one of the three, so it's good. I like it. I want to acknowledge you, Andrew, for constantly showing up, man. You constantly show up on the research, data. You're just studying and obsessing about how to find the best strategies based on data to support human beings. And that's what we're all about here at the School of Greatness, is how do we learn the things that can improve our lives. And so I'm so grateful for you. I appreciate you. And the world is better having you in it and the information. And the way you break it down, you really break it down in a scientific way that's also easy to understand. You use the big terminology, but then you'd say, well, this is what this means and how to use it. So I really appreciate how you show up, your almost 30 years of commitment to this work and understanding the brain, sleep, the body, all these things for optimizing our life. I appreciate you, my friend.
Thank you. I appreciate you too, and I admire the way you show up to things. I admire your energy levels and your positivity, but hearing all that is very gratifying, and thanks so much for having me on. It's always a tremendous pleasure.
Of course, man. Final question, what's your definition of greatness?
Constant, deliberate focus on self-improvement.
If you enjoyed that interview, then I know you'll love what we have coming up right now.
We've all heard the sayings, how do you journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. Or how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? Or, there are all these sayings, and it goes back to the Bible a bit earlier, right? I mean, this is not new, these are not new sayings, but they're showing up in different forms. What's lost in those short descriptions, however, is that every step is not equivalent. If it were just that a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step, everyone would pursue their goals. Everyone would push back against adversity. You can read the inspirational stories as many times as one needs, and I do think inspirational stories are of very high value. In fact, I think they're vicarious dopamine. I think they give us the sense that we could, which then orients hope, which then orients us to the world again.
Maybe it's possible for me.
That's right. So let's say, let's take the example of somebody who's...
Just to finish that story of it's not about just taking a single step and one step at a time, is it because there's adversities every 10 steps you go, and so it's harder and harder? It's not just
well,
one.
it's just very non-linear.
Yeah.
You know, it's some days go. You know, I know this from my scientific career. It's, you know, some days it's easy, some days it's hard. It's all over the place, right? So I think the thing to remember is that dopamine is this incredibly powerful molecule that allows us to buffer the effort process. It allows us to be in effort longer, and it allows us to actually eventually enjoy the process of effort.
And not think about the reward, but just say, oh, I'm enjoying the process.
Well, you just described the first step. The first step in learning to attach dopamine to the effort process, which is the key operation in order to succeed, is to be very careful about how much you focus on the end goal. Keeping the goal in mind is important for like a proper orientation. You have to know the ultimate destination. But if at any point we were to evaluate our progress relative to that end goal, or if we don't know what the end goal is, there's a huge gap there, and it can feel overwhelming.
And depressing, and I'm not good enough.
That's right.
I should just give up. What am I doing this for?
That's right.
And those thoughts will affect us.
And they're very realistic, right? I mean, as Carol will say, and other people have said in the psychology field, you know, positive self-talk, oftentimes, unless you do it correctly, you're badly wrong. You know, lying to yourself won't work. Saying I'm a winner, when you haven't lost, or you haven't won yet, is great, but that's not the most effective use of these systems.
Well, you're also being out of integrity with yourself. You're telling yourself a lie.
Right.
You're like, and then you're losing the ability to have confidence because you're just lying to yourself.
Right. And if it's really extreme, there's a name for it, it's delusional. Right? And people will start to point that out, and then it becomes harder to recruit people into your goals. So I think the key thing is to attach that sense of reward to the effort process. It's saying, look, I am oriented in the right direction and rewarding the things you're not doing. I'm not back on my heels. I'm not just staying, I'm down in the morning. A good example of this came to me recently. I have a good friend who did 9 years in the SEAL teams. His name is Pat Dossett, and we were talking about, the Admiral McCraven thing, and they'll get up and go to bed, and they really do that. And I think the way it was described was, so at the end of the day, even if everything doesn't go well, your bed is still. To me, that's not that big of a reward, frankly. So I said that, and I
love it though. I make my bed.
I definitely make my bed in the morning, but I mean, going back and seeing that at the end of a hard day, it's not enough. I felt like there was something else there. So I asked him, he said, well, it's very interesting because part of it is about not just making your bed, but it's the things you're not doing by making your bed. You're not lying in bed and ruminating. You're not back on your heels.
You're not on your phone.
That's right.
Yeah.
So when you look at, and I've spent a lot of time with people in high-performing communities, mainly through some consulting work, but what you find is that, we can all either be back on our heels, flat-footed, or forward center. And when you look at people who are in these high-performance communities, they try and keep their center of mass forward, almost through what seem like trivial things, like making your bed or making the cup of coffee. But it's not just about what you're doing, it's all the things you're not doing that can put you down the path of ruminating or put you down the path of unhealthy behavior. So the key to this is, if we want to be very concrete, we should probably focus on actions. And I'll use fitness as an example because it translates to everybody, whereas people's circumstances different. Let's say somebody really wants to take on a fitness routine. They hate running, or they want to lose weight in a healthy way. It's fine. So we've all heard the example, well, you put your shoes by the door on day 1. Day 2, you put them on. Day 3, you go out the door. Day 4, you walk around the block, and then eventually, like, they're running marathons. Okay, great, but to sustain that behavior, or even to make the behavior pleasurable and to give you energy, the key is to subjectively reward those steps. So it's not going to be, let's say I go out and I run a mile, and my goal is to run 10 miles in a few weeks. The key is, as you're in the strain of that mile, the hard part, you want to tell yourself, this is the good part. This is the part that gives me energy. And I'll be very surprised if people don't actually feel like they could continue further. So it's a journey of 1,000 miles starts is made up of single steps. But the key is to reward the harder steps, not the easier ones, and not the ones where you get the thing that you want.
Don't reward yourself for putting your shoes on and taking a step outside.
You could if that was a huge barrier for you.
It was very hard.
If it was very hard for you.
But running the 10 miles is hard.
Right. Find the wall and push a little bit further through that wall and reward that process. So this is why I think reps in the gym, the final reps, like reps to failure, are usually not the best example.
first of all, most people aren't doing reps to failure, and it doesn't translate to young kids and stuff. You probably shouldn't be doing heavy reps to failure, this kind of thing. What you want, however, is if you're going to go there, to think about this is the hard part, because that's when adrenaline, norepinephrine are getting maxed out, and that's when you have an opportunity to bring dopamine in and teach those neural pathways to slam that back. And I don't want to highlight them too much because they are very niche and specialized community, but you look at people in special operations, you look at the process, like the whole evaluation process of who gets in and who doesn't. It's really about putting people into stress and seeing who can not just make it through that stress, but buffer that stress. Reward the process through teamwork, reward the process of stress through some internal dialogue that has everything to do with not being back on your heels, not being flat-footed, but centering mass forward. And I should also be clear, I'm not talking about everybody being super aggro and always like, work. Yeah. In fact, if you're spending too much epinephrine, if you're too much of an adrenaline junkie, you will burn out eventually, unless you can find ways to recover yourself with a buffer diet. And the recovery process is especially important. There's a second reward system. So you've got the dopamine system, and I guess to really put a box around it, the subjective reward needs to be done at the hardest portion of the process. The tough conversation with a significant other, it's like when it's really tough and that's when you want to start telling yourself, this is the good part because I'm not speaking, or this is the good part because
I'm not reacting.
Right, I'm not reacting, or this is the good part because I'm probably not doing it correctly, but I'm on the right path, right? They're upset, they're not feeling your empathy, this kind of thing, or you're not really understanding what's going on, you're getting frustrated. But if you tell yourself, this is the neural pathway getting ground in there, like really dialed in, so that the next time I'm going to breeze right past this. That's really how the process works. Because remember, no one comes along and drips dopamine in your ear, even if you get $1 billion, or you win a Nobel Prize, or you win the presidency. It's all internal. These neurochemicals are all internal, and while some of them are designed to be released in response to things very reflexively, like food, sex, sleep, all these things will trigger these neurochemicals. We have this big forebrain which allows us to place subjective context on it.
How do you do it then? How do you bring dopamine in your brain subjectively through daily conversations with yourself?
So there's a process I'm going through right now where I'm trying to write a book, and it's hard. It's hard, and I was told that the harder it is, the better I'm probably doing it. And I was like, great. My editor's ready to kill me, and slow, and I know, and I'm a very slow person. I drive people crazy. I'm like glacially slow because science is slow, and I like to get things right.
You want to rush it.
I like to get things right, but I'm very proud of the fact that everything we've published, I can stand behind. It's the best we could do with the tools at the time, and I just know that when I look back on a writing career or a scientific career, I want to be able to say, every journal we put in is rock solid, everything is rock solid, we had fun doing it, the relationship, so I go slow. Yeah. But as a consequence, what I'm finding is there are a lot of interferences these days. I think social media is great, I teach neuroscience on social media, and it's incredible how much time and energy it can take. So what I've started doing now is I turn off my phone and I lock it in a safe. And I experience extreme anxiety.
Right?
It's so weird.
Why is that? Is it because it gives you so much dopamine that when you're not having it?
Well, this is scary because I actually think, brief anecdote, on the weekend I was driving as a kid that I mentor, and I picked up my phone and I was texting him while I was driving. And he said to me, it was really embarrassing for me, he said, I wish you wouldn't text while you drive. And I put it down and I realized, this is crazy. I know that my life and his life is far more important, and the lives of the people around me are far more important than any text message, which means I wasn't doing it rationally. It's just pure reflex at this point. So I don't think I pick up the phone because I don't even know what I'm looking for there anymore. It's just become reflexive. So for me lately, the longer I can keep that phone in a safe and write on a grant or this book, what I tell myself is the agitation is good. At least I'm not doing that. And then I find that as I start to write and I get into the process, I start feeling good about it, and I'll pause and say, okay, I have control. I have ultimate control of everything. I can put that thing away. There might be a nuclear war out there, and I'm just doing this anyway. I have control over my thoughts, my feelings, and behavior. So I tell myself that, and then I find I have immense energy, and all I want to do is write. And I kind of tunnel into the process.
Wow.
And I think that sometimes people need to write these things out for themselves so it's really concrete. I think some people are so unskilled at subjective rewards that writing it out is really powerful.
So what would you write out for yourself as a subjective reward for your success?
As long as I'm writing, I'm on the right path. As long as I'm not writing and I'm looking at my phone, I'm not on the right path. Because for me, the 2 or 3 things that are most important for my career are writing grants, working on this book manuscript, and writing scientific manuscripts. I mean, there are other things as well.
And anything else that you're not doing is holding you back from doing that.
That's right.
So you need to be focused, set our mouths forward on doing those things.
That's right. So I don't do any jumping around, power poses, things like that. I will use tools to kind of ramp up my dopamine. There are certain songs that are really embedded in my emotional. Maybe go back to when I was a wild skateboarding punk rock teenager that will get me fired up. And I think there's real utility. That's pure dopamine. That's just a dopamine.
Moments, but it's not sustainable. You have to subjectively keep yourself motivated. Yes, right?
That's right. And then if I finish a chapter, I will stop for a moment and I'll just kind of smile and laugh at myself. I'm big on like self-reflection with humor and just think this is crazy. My brain is under my control. There would be people out there that say there's no free will, but